Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I forgot to go live, so I have to go over here, and you're going to see me going live on Facebook. So one moment, let me go over here. Go live. Go live. Sorry, everybody. I'm sorry for the delay, but I forgot. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry for the delay. It is now 10:01. I meant to go earlier a little bit. I meant to go earlier live, and I forgot. So join me over on YouTube. Right now, I'm live right now over on YouTube. We're going to be continuing to read A House of Pomegranates by Oscar Wilde. Join me right now over on the Gentleman Psychic YouTube. Join me right now. Let's see if I get any people. I know I've got 3 people here on. Hello. Everyone who's watching on Facebook, come and join me live right now at the Gentleman Psychic YouTube. John Maxwell is over here on. Mary Jane is here. Hello, hello. Good evening. Good evening. Join me right now over on YouTube, the Gentleman Psychic. Hello, Brianna. Come and join me over on YouTube, the Gentleman Psychic. I'm reading A House of Pomegranates by Oscar Wilde. Hello, Christy. Good to see you. Okay, Facebook friends, join me over there. I'll see you shortly. Bye. I have to end that broadcast. Okay, sorry about the delay. I got so wrapped up in other things, I completely did not realize the time. But now I have to go over here and I have to share all of the links. So one moment, let me do all of the medias of social. Let me figure out where I am here. Okay, it says I'm live, and we're going to share this one. We'll share it to Facebook and join me live. Okay, there we go. One more, we'll do it over here. Let's see. Copy link. Paste the link there. And then we'll go over here. That is true. That is true, John Maxwell. I have to go over here to the Gentleman Psychic Facebook page. We'll go live on there. Okay. I'm glad that I'm here to cheer you up, Christy. So we are reading through A House of Pomegranates by Oscar Wilde. I don't really have a lot of announcements this morning, this evening, because tomorrow is what I like to call Xmas. So happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy Merry, all of that. I don't really celebrate, but it is the season of lights. I do celebrate Yule and Saturnalia, and of course my birthday, which is coming up. I do celebrate that. Good evening, sweet Sierra. Lovely to see you. I have today, by the way, my favorite drink tonight. I'm having a glass of pineapple juice. Some people have noted that in a previous video, I have stated that I am lactose intolerant, and yet I was drinking what seemed to be milk. It was actually oat milk. I am very much allergic to, I'm lactose intolerant, so I cannot have dairy products. Rose and Rue, great to see you. Take a deep breath. Thank you, John Maxwell. I'm going to start off by actually drinking. A funny story concerning drink. When I was performing as Freddie Mercury in Greece, many years ago now, I was working as Freddie Mercury at a nightclub, and I had been singing and singing and singing, and I leaned to the bartender. I said, "Can I get a drink, please?" Meaning water. I meant water, because that's what I drink. I would normally drink that. And instead of water, it was clear. It was a clear liquid. And I downed this white liquid because my throat was dry, and it was It was vodka, I believe, straight vodka. So I went, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Monferno, looking great. Hope you have a great upcoming birthday. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Um, Also, I wanted to tell you another funny Freddie Mercury story. So, someone told me, was it today or yesterday? You know who you look like? You look exactly like Freddie Mercury, excepting for your hair. And I said, well, I played Freddie Mercury, but in those days I had more hair. It was down here, but that's okay. I've earned it. I think my high forehead. But anyway, I suppose without further ado, make certain you hit the like button, the subscribe, and all of that. It would really help out the channel. And I do this free of charge because it helps to promote literacy, and I appreciate it. Sweet Sierra says, I was brainstorming for a book I'm writing before I tuned in. And guess what, Richard Lale? It's based on the precognitive dream I had a few years ago. Very good. Do write that. I think that's brilliant. All right, my lovelies. Let us continue. The Young King. It was the night before the day fixed for his coronation, and the young king was sitting alone in his beautiful chamber. His courtiers had all taken their leave of him, bowing their heads to the ground according to the ceremonious usage of the day, and had retired to the great hall of the palace to receive a few lessons from the professor of etiquette, there being some of them who had still quite natural manners, which in a courtier is, I need hardly say, a very grave offence. The lad, for he was only a lad, being but 16 years of age, was not sorry at their departure, and had flung himself back with deep sigh of relief on the soft cushions of his embroidered couch, lying there, wild-eyed and open-mouthed, like a brown woodland fawn, or some found him, coming upon him almost by chance, and pipe in hand, he was following the flock of the poor goatherd who had brought him up, and whose son fancied himself to be, the child of the old king's only daughter by a secret marriage with one much beneath, a stranger, some said, who by the wonderful magic of his lute playing had made the young princess love him, while others spoke of an artist from Rimini, to whom the princess had shown much, perhaps too much honor, and who had suddenly disappeared from the city, leaving his work in the cathedral unfinished. He had been, when but a week old, stolen away from his mother's side as she slept, and given into the charge of a common peasant and his wife, who were without children of their own, and lived in a remote part of the forest more than a day's ride from the town. Grief, or the plague, as a day grief or the plague, as the court physician stated, or, as some suggested, a swift Italian poison administered in a cup of spiced wine, slew within an hour of her waking the white girl who had given him birth, and as the trusty messenger who bore the child across the saddle bow stooped from his weary horse and knocked at the rude door of the goatherd's hut, the body of the princess was being lowered into the open grave that had been dug in the deserted churchyard beyond the city gates, a grave where it was said that another body was also lying, that that of a young man of marvelous and foreign beauty, whose hands were tied behind him with a knotted cord, and whose breast was stabbed with many red wounds. Such, at least, was the story that men whispered to each other. Certain Certain it was that the old king, when on his deathbed, whether moved by remorse for his great sin, or merely desiring that the kingdom should not pass away from his line, had had the lad sent for, and, in the presence of the council, had acknowledged him as his heir. And it seems that from the very first moment of his recognition, he had shown signs of that strange passion for beauty that was destined to have so great an influence over his life. Those who accompanied him to the suite of rooms set apart for his service often spoke of the cry of pleasure that broke from his lips when he saw the delicate raiment, the rich jewels that had been prepared for him, and of the almost fierce joy which he flung aside his rough leathern tunic and coarse sheepskin cloak. He missed, indeed, at times the fine freedom of his forest life, and was always apt to chafe at the tedious court ceremonies that occupied so much of each day. But the wonderful palace, Joisy, as they called it, of which he now found himself lord, seemed to him to be a new world fresh fashioned for his delight. And as soon as he could escape from the council board or audience chamber, he would run down the great staircase with its lions of gilt bronze and its steps of bright porphyry, and wander from room to room and from corridor to corridor, like who is one like one who was seeking to find in beauty an anodyne from the pain, a sort of restoration from sickness. Upon these journeys of discovery, as he would call them, and indeed they were to him real voyages through a marvelous land, he would sometimes be accompanied by the slim, fair-haired court pages with their floating mantles and gay fluttering ribbons, but more often he would be alone, feeling through a certain quick instinct, which was almost a divination, that the secrets of art are best learned in secret, and that beauty, like wisdom, loves the lonely worshipper. Many curious stories were related about him at this period. It was said that a stout burgomaster, who had come to deliver a florid oratorial address on behalf of the citizens of the town, and caught sight of him kneeling in a real adoration before a great picture that had just been brought from Venice, and that seemed to herald the worship of some new gods. On another occasion, he had been missed for several hours, and after lengthened search had been discovered in a he had been seen, so that to the marble brow of an antique statue that had been discovered in the bed of the river on the occasion of the building of the stone bridge, and was inscribed with the name of Bithynian slave Hadrian. He had passed a whole night in nothing the effect and noting the effect of the moonlight on silver image of Endymion. All rare and costly materials had certainly a great fascination for him, and in his eagerness to procure them, he sent away many merchants, some to traffic for amber with the rough fisher folk of the North Seas, some to Egypt to look for that curious green turquoise, which is found only in the tombs of kings, and is said to possess magical properties, some to Persia for silk carpets and painted pottery, and others to India to buy gauze and blue enamel and shawls of fine wool. But what had occupied him most was the robe he was to wear at his coronation, and the robe of tissued gold, and the ruby-studded crown, and the scepter with its rows of rings of pearls. Indeed, it was of this that he was thinking tonight as he lay back on his luxurious couch, watching the great pine wood log that was burning itself out on the open hearth. The designs, which were from the hands of the most famous artist of the time, had been submitted to him many months before, and he had given orders that artificers were to toil night and day to carry them out, and that the whole world was to be searched for jewels that would be worthy of their work. He saw himself in fancy standing at the at the high altar of the cathedral, in the fair raiment of a king, and a smile played and lingered about his boyish lips, and lit up with bright lustre his dark woodland eyes. After some time he rose from his seat, and leaning against the carved penthouse of the chimney, looked round at the dimly lit room. The walls were hung with rich tapestries, representing the triumph of beauty. A large press inlaid with agate and I can never say that word, lazuli, filled one corner, and facing the window stood a curiously wrought cabinet with lacquer panels of powdered and mosaiced gold, on which were placed some delicate goblets of Venetian glass, and a cup of dark veined onyx. Pale poppies were broidered on the silk coverlet of the bed, as though they had fallen from the tired hands of sleep, and tall reeds of fluted ivory bore up the velvet canopy, from which great tufts of ostrich plumes sprang like white foam to the pallid silver of the fretted ceiling. A laughing narcissus in the green bronze held a polished mirror above its head. On the table stood a flat bowl of amethyst. Outside, he could see the huge dome of the cathedral looming like a bubble over the shadowy houses, and the weary sentinels pacing up and down on the misty terrace by the river. Far away in an orchard, a nightingale was singing. A faint perfume of jasmine came through the open window. He brushed his brown curls back from his forehead and, taking up a lute, let his fingers stray across the chords. His heavy eyelids drooped, and a strange languor came over him. Never before had he felt so keenly, or with such exquisite joy, the magic and the mystery of beautiful things. When midnight sounded from the clock tower, he touched a bell, and his pages entered and disrobed him with much ceremony, pouring rose water over his hands, and strewing flowers on his pillows. A few moments after that, they had left the room and fell asleep. And as he slept, he dreamt a dream, and this was his dream. He thought that he was standing in a long, low attic amidst the whir and clatter of many looms. The meagre daylight peered in through the grated windows and showed him the gaunt figures of the weavers bending over their cases. Pale, sickly-looking children were crouched on the huge crossbeams. As the shuttles dashed through the warp, they lifted up their heavy battens, and when the shuttle stopped, they let the battens fall and pressed the threads together. Their faces were pinched with famine, and their thin hands shook and trembled. Some haggard women were seated at a table sewing. A horrible odor filled the place. The air was foul and heavy, and the walls dripped and streamed with damp. The young king went over to one of the weavers and stood by him and watched him. And the weaver looked at him angrily and said, "Why art thou watching me? Art thou a spy set on us by our master?" "Who is thy master?" asked the young king. "Our master," cried the weaver bitterly. "He is a man like myself. Indeed, there is but this difference between us, that he wears fine clothes while I go in rags, and that while I am weak from hunger, he suffers not a little from overfeeding." "The land is free," said the young king, "and thou art no man's slave." "In war," answered the weaver, "the strong make slaves of the weak, and in peace the rich make slaves of the poor. We must work to live, and they give us such mean wages that we die. We toil for them all day long, and they heap up gold in their coffers, and our children fade away before their time, and the faces of those we love become hard and evil. We tread out the grapes, another drinks the wine. We sow the corn, and our own board is empty. We have chains, though no eye beholds them, and are slaves, though men call us free." "Is it so with all?" he asked. "It is so with all," answered the weaver. "With the young as well as with the old, with the women as well as with the men. with the little children as well as with those who are stricken in years. The merchants grind us down, and we must needs do their bidding. The priest rides by and tells his beads, and no man has care of us. Through our sunless lanes creeps in with his sodden face, follows close behind her. Misery wakes us in the morning, and shame sits with us at night. But what are these things to thee? Thou art not one of us. Thy face is too happy. And he turned away scowling, and threw the scuttle across the loom. And the young king saw that it was threaded with a thread of gold. And a great terror seized upon him. And he said to the weaver, What robe is that thou art weaving? It is the robe for the coronation of the young king, he answered. What is it to thee? And the young king gave a loud cry and woke, and lo, he was in his own chamber. And through the window he saw the great honey-colored moon hanging in the dusky air. And he fell asleep again, and dreamt, and this was his dream. He thought he was lying on the deck of a huge galley that was being rowed by 100 slaves. On a carpet by his side, the master of the galley was seated. He was black as ebony, and his turban was of crimson silk. Great earrings of silver dragged down the thick lobes of his ears, and in his hands had a pair of ivory scales. The slaves were naked, but he cloth, and each man was chained to his neighbor. The hot beat brightly upon them, and the people ran up and down the gangway and lashed them with whips of hide. They stretched out their lean arms and pulled the heavy oars through the water. The salt spray flew from the blades. At last, they reached a little bay and began to take soundings. A light wind blew from the shore and covered the deck and the great lateen sail from the fine red dust. 3 Arabs, mounted on wild asses, rowed out and threw spears at them. The master of the galley took a painted bow in his hand and shot one of them in the throat. He fell heavily into the surf, and his companions galloped away. A woman wrapped in yellow veil followed slowly on a camel, looking back now and then at the dead body. As soon as they had cast anchor and hauled down the sail, the slaves went into the hold and brought up a long rope ladder, heavily weighted with lead. The master of the galley threw it over the side, making the ends fast to 2 iron stanchions. Then the slaves seized the youngest of the slaves and knocked the guys off, and filled his nostrils and ears with wax, and tied a big stone around his waist. He crept wearily down the ladder and disappeared into the sea. A few bubbles rose where he sank. Some of the other slaves peered curiously over the side. At the prow of the galley sat a shark charmer beating monotonously upon a drum. After some time, the diver rose up out of the water and clung panting to the ladder with a pearl in his right hand. The slaves seized it from him and thrust him back. The slaves fell asleep over their oars. Again and again he came up, and each time that he did so, he brought with him a beautiful pearl. The master of the gallery weighed them and put them into the little bag of green leather. The young king tried to speak, but his tongue seemed to cleave to the roof of his mouth, and his lips refused to move. The slaves chattered to each other and began to quarrel over a string of bright beads. 2 cranes flew round and round the vessel. Then the diver came up for the last time, and the pearl that he brought with him was fairer than all the pearls of Ormuz, for it was shaped like the full moon, and whiter than the morning star. But his face was strangely pale, and as he fell upon the deck, the blood gushed from his ears and nostrils. He quivered for a little, and then he was still. The slaves shrugged their shoulders and threw the body overboard. The master of the gallery laughed and, reaching out, took the pearl, and when he saw it, he pressed it to his forehead and bowed. "It shall be," he said, "for the scepter of the young king." And he made a sign to the slaves to draw up the anchor. And when the young king and woke, and through the window he saw long gray fingers of the dawn clutching at the fading stars, and he fell asleep again, and he dreamt, and this was his dream. He thought that he was wandering through a dim wood hung with strange fruits and with beautiful poisonous flowers. The adders hissed at him as he went by, and the bright parrots flew screaming from branch to branch. Huge tortoises lay asleep upon hot mud. The trees were full of apes and peacocks. On and on he went till he reached the outskirts of the wood. And there he saw an immense multitude of men toiling in the bed of dried up river. They swarmed up the crag like ants. They dug deep pits in the ground and went down into them. Some of them cleft the rocks with great axes, others grabbled in the sand. They tore up the cactus by its roots and trampled on the scarlet blossoms. They hurried about, calling to each other, and no man was idle. From the darkness of the cavern, Death and Avarice watched them, and Death said, "I am weary. Give me a third of them and let me go." But Avarice shook her head. "They are my servants," she answered. And Death said to her, "What hast thou in thy hand?" "I have 3 grains of corn," she answered. "What is it to thee?" "Give me one of them," cried Death, "to plant in my garden, only one of them, and I will go away." "I will not give thee anything," said Avarice, and she hid her hand in the fold of her raiment. And Death laughed, and took a cup into a pool of water, and out of the cup rose Ague. She passed through the great multitude, and a third of them lay dead. A cold mist followed her, and the water snakes ran by her side. And when Avarice saw that a third of the multitude was dead, she beat her beast and wept. She beat her barren bosom and cried aloud. "Thou hast slain a third of my servants," she cried. "Get thee gone. There is war in the mountains of Tartary, and the kings of each side are calling to thee. The Afghans have slain the black ox and are marching to battle. They have beaten upon their shields with their spears and have put on their helmets of iron. What is my valley to thee, that thou shouldst tarry in it? Get thee gone, and come here no more." "Nay," answered Death, "but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go." But Avarice shut her hand and clenched her teeth. "I will not give thee anything," she muttered. And Death laughed, and took up a black stone and threw it into the forest. And out of the thickest of the wild hemlock came Fever in the robe of flame. She passed through the multitude and touched them, and each man that she touched died. The grass withered beneath her feet as she walked, and Avarice shuddered and put her ashes on her head. "Thou art cruel," she cried, "thou art cruel. There is famine in the walled cities of India, and the cisterns of Samkarand have run dry. There is famine in the walled cities of Egypt, and the locusts have come up from the desert. The Nile has not overflowed its banks, and the priests have cursed Isis and Osiris. Get thee gone to those who need thee, and leave me my servants." "Nay," answered Death, "but till thou hast given me a grain of corn, I will not go." "I will not give thee anything," said Avarice, and Death laughed again. And he whistled through his fingers, and a woman came flying through the air. Plague was written upon her forehead, and the crowd of lean vultures wheeled around her. She covered the valley with her wings, and no man was left alive. And Avarice fled, shrieking, through the forest. And Death leaped upon his red horse and galloped away. And his galloping was faster than the wind. And out of the slime at the bottom of the valley crept dragons and horrible things with scales. And jackals came trotting along the sand, sniffing up the air and with their nostrils. And the young king wept and said, "Who were these men, and for what were they seeking?" "For rubies, for a king's crown," answered one who stood behind him. And the young king started, and, turning round, he saw a man habitated as a pilgrim, and holding in his hand a mirror of silver. And he grew pale, and said, "For what, king?" And the pilgrim answered, "Look in the mirror, and thou shalt see him." And he looked in the mirror, and seeing his own face, he gave a great cry and woke, and the bright sunlight was streaming into the room, and from the trees of the garden, and the pleasaunce of the birds were singing, and the chamberlain and the high officers of state came in and made obeisance to him. And the pages brought him the robe of tissued gold, and set the crown and the scepter before him. And the young king looked at them, and they were beautiful. More beautiful were they than aught that he had ever seen. But he remembered his dreams, and he said to his lords, "Take these things away, for I will not wear them." And the courtiers were amazed, and some of them laughed, for they thought that he was jesting. But he spake sternly to them again, and said, "Take these things away, and hide them from me. Though it be the day of my coronation, I will not wear them. For on the loom of sorrow, and by the white hands of pain, has this robe been woven. There is blood in the heart of the ruby, and death in the heart of the pearl." And he told them his three dreams. And when the courtiers heard them, they looked at each other and whispered, saying, "Surely he is mad. For what is a dream but a dream, and a vision but a vision? They are not real things, that one should heed them. And what have we to do with the lives of those who toil for us? Shall a man not eat bread till he has seen the sower, nor drink wine till he has talked with the vine dresser?" And the chamberlain spake to the young king, and said, "My lord, I pray thee, set aside these black thoughts of thine, and put on this fair robe, and set this crown upon thy head. For how shall people know that thou art a king, if thou hast not a king's raiment?" And the young king looked at him. "Is it so, indeed?" he questioned. "Will they not know me for a king, if I have not a king's raiment?" They will not know thee, my lord," cried the chamberlain. "I had thought that there had been men who were king-like," he answered. "But it may be as thou sayest, and yet I will not wear this robe, nor will I be crowned with this crown, but even as I came to the palace, so will I go forth from it." And he bade them all leave him, save one page, whom he kept as his companion, a lad a year younger than himself. Him he kept for his service, and when he had bathed himself in clear water, he opened a great painted chest, and from it took the leathern tunic and rough sheepskin cloak that he had worn when he watched on the hillside the shaggy goats of the goatherd. These he put on, and in his hand he took his rude shepherd's staff. And a little page opened his big blue eyes in wonder, and smiling to him, "My lord, I see thy robe and thy scepter, but where is thy crown?" And the young king plucked a spray of wild briar that was climbing over the balcony, and bent it, and made a circlet of it, and set it upon his own head. "This shall be my crown," he answered. And thus attired, he passed out of his chamber into the great hall, where the nobles were waiting for him. And the nobles made merry, and some of them cried out to him, "My lord, the people wait for their king, and thou art showest them a beggar." And others were wroth and said, "He brings shame upon our state, and is unworthy to be our master." But he answered them not a word, but passed on, and went down the bright porphyry staircase and out through the gates of bronze, and mounted upon his horse and rode towards the cathedral, the little page running beside him. And the people laughed and said, "It is the king's fool who is riding by." And they mocked him. And he drew rein and said, "Nay, but I am the king." And he told them his three dreams. And a man came out of the crowd and spake bitterly to him and said, "Sir, knowest thou not that out of the luxury of the rich cometh the life of the poor? By your pomp we are nurtured, and your vices give us bread. To toil for a hard master is bitter, but to have no master to toil for is more bitter still. Thinkest thou that the ravens will feed us? And what cure hast thou for these things? Wilt thou say to the buyer, Thou shalt buy for so much, and to the seller, Thou shalt sell at this price? I trow not. Therefore go back to thy palace, and put on thy purple and fine linen. What hast thou to do with us, and what we suffer? Are not the rich and poor brothers? Asked the king. Ay, answered the man, and the name of the rich brother is Cain. And the young king's eyes filled with tears, and he rode on through the murmurs of the people, and the little page grew afraid and left him. And when he reached the great portal of the cathedral, the soldiers thrust their halberts out and said, "What dost thou seek here? None enters by this door but the king." And his face flushed with anger, and he said to them, "I am the king." And he waved their halberts aside and passed in. And when the old bishop saw him coming in his goatherd's dress, he rose up in wonder from his throne, and went to meet him, and said to him, "My son, is this king's apparel? And with what crown shall I crown thee? And what sceptre shall I place in thy hand? Surely this should be to thee a day of joy, and not a day of abasement. Shall joy wear what grief has fashioned?" said the young king. And he told him his three dreams. And when the bishop had heard them, he knit his brows and said, "My son, I am an old man, and in the winter of my days, and I know that many evil things are done in the wide world. The fierce robbers come down from the mountains and carry off the little children and sell them to the Moors. The lions lie in wait for the caravans and leap upon the camels. The wild boars The wild boar roots up the corn in the valley, and the foxes gnaw the vine upon the hill. The pirates lay waste the sea coast and burn the ships of the fishermen and take their nets from them. In the salt marshes live the lepers. They have houses of wattled reeds, and none may come nigh to them. The beggars wander through the cities and eat their food with the dogs. Canst thou make these things not to be? Wilt thou take the leper for thy bedfellow, and set the beggar at thy board? Shall the lion do thy bidding, and the wild boar obey thee? Is not he who made misery wiser than thou art? Wherefore I praise thee not for this that thou hast done, but I bid thee ride back to the palace, and make thy face glad, and put on thy raiment that beseemeth a king, and with the crown of gold I will crown thee, and the scepter of pearl will I place in thy hand. And as for thy dreams, think no more of them. The burden of this world is too great for one man to bear, and the world's sorrow too heavy for one heart to suffer. Sayest thou that in this house, said the young king, and he strode past the bishop and climbed up the steps of the altar and stood before the image of Christ. He stood before the image of Christ, and on his right hand and on his left were the marvelous vessels of gold, the chalice with the yellow wine, and the vial with the holy oil. He knelt before the image of Christ, and the great candles burned brightly by the jeweled shrine, and the smoke of the incense curled in thin blue wreaths through the dome. He bowed his head in prayer, and the priests in their stiff copes crept away from the altar, and suddenly a wild tumult came from the street outside, and in entered the nobles with drawn swords, and nodding plumes, and shields of polished steel. Where is this dreamer of dreams? They cried. Where is this king who is apparelled like a beggar, this boy who brings shame upon our state? Surely we will slay him, for he is unworthy to rule over us. And the young king bowed his head again and prayed. And when he had finished his prayer, he rose up, and turning round, he looked at them sadly. And lo, through the painted window came the sunlight streaming upon him, and the sunbeams wove round him a tissued robe that was fairer than the robe that had been fashioned for his pleasure. The dead staff blossomed and bore lilies that were whiter than pearls. The dry thorn blossomed and bore roses that were redder than rubies. Whiter than fine pearls were the lilies, and their stems were of bright silver. Redder than male rubies were the roses, and their leaves were of beaten gold. He stood there in the raiment of a king, and the gates of the jeweled shrine flew open, and from the crystal of many rayed monstrance shone a marvelous and mystical light. He stood there in a king's raiment, and the glory of God filled the place. And the saints, in their carven niches, seemed to move in their fair raiment of a king. He stood before them, and the organ pealed out its music, and the trumpets blew upon their trumpets, and the singing boys sang, and the people fell upon their knees in awe, and the nobles sheathed their swords and did homage, and the bishop's face grew pale, and his hands trembled. A greater than I hath crowned thee, he cried, and he knelt before him. And the young king came down from the high altar and passed home to the midst of the people, but no man dared look upon his face, for it was like the face of an angel. I don't know where we are in time. We'll do one more, I think. The Star Child. Though I do want to actually give a little bit of an interjection. I want to explain a few things, if I may. Lovely, sweet Ciara. Actually, I think I will pause here for just a moment, because there's a reason. I'll actually show it so you can see it too. There's a gentleman, Julian Manuel Pupo, who said, Jesus Christ saves people, wake up, you morons, Jesus is coming. What a way to, first of all, try to preach to someone, is to belittle them by calling them morons. That's fine. Hello, Tony. Good to see you. I wanted to discuss a tiny little bit about the time of this book. Oscar Wilde was a brilliant man, but he was a tortured man. And in the 19th century England, there were two ways that one could go. One could go in the way of seeking goodness, truly goodness, and being torn by one's own desires and understanding that one does not fit, but trying so desperately to fit in. And then the opposite of that is Aleister Crowley, whom had tried to fit in early on and then realized he couldn't hold it up and couldn't continue. So he decided he wanted to do anything that was he considered wicked and bad. Oscar Wilde was a good man, but he was a tortured man, and he did cling to his religious indoctrination. He was Irish, but he was Protestant, and he clung to his indoctrination. So take it for what it is. It is a time and place. There are words that are said in these books that are out of date. But again, you have to understand the time. Lauren Morgan Richards, good evening. Wrist Wrinkle Wickedly says, oh, I was hoping for a story tonight for my dizzy little head as I bow to Queen Mab. Very good. Now, with that said, we shall continue on with The Star Child. And I happen to particularly enjoy the title because it reminds me of David Bowie. So, let us continue. The Star Child. Once upon a time, two poor woodcutters were making their way home through a great pine forest. It was winter, and a night of bitter cold. The snow lay thick upon the ground, and upon the branches of the tree the frost crept, snapping the little twigs on either side of them as they passed. And when they came to the mountain torrent, she was hanging motionless in the air, for the Ice King had kissed her. I should take a drink. So cold was it that even the animals and the birds did not know what to make of it. Ugh, snarled the wolf as he limped through in the brushwood with his tail between his legs. This is perfectly monstrous weather. Why doesn't the government look to it? Wheat, 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 twittered the green linnets. The old earth is dead, and they have laid her out in her white shroud. The earth is going to do married, and is going to be married, and this is her bridal dress, whispered the turtle doves to each other. Their little pink feet were quite frostbitten, but they felt that it was their duty to to take a romantic view of the situation. Nonsense, growled the wolf. I tell you that it is all the fault of the government, and if you don't believe me, I shall eat you. The wolf had thoroughly practical mind and was never at a loss for a good argument. Well, for my own part, said the woodpecker, who is born a philosopher, I don't care an atomic theory for explanations. If a thing is so, it is so, and at present it is terribly cold. Terribly cold, it certainly was. The little squirrels who lived inside the tall fir tree kept rubbing each other's noses to keep themselves warm, and the rabbits curled themselves up in their holes and did not venture even to look out of doors. The only people who seemed to enjoy it were the great horned owls. Their feathers were quite stiff with rime, but they did not mind, and they rolled their large yellow eyes and called out to each other across the forest, toot woot, too hoo, too whit, too hoo. What delightful weather we are having! On and on went the woodcutters, blowing lustily upon their fingers and stamping with their huge iron-shod boots upon the caked snow. Once they sank into a deep drift and came out as white as millers are when the stones are grinding, and once they slipped on the hard, smooth ice where the marsh water was frozen, and their something fell out of their bundles, and they had to pick them up and bind them together again. And once they thought that they had lost their way, and a great terror seized on them, for they knew that the snow is cruel to those who sleep in her arms. But they put their trust in the good Saint Martin, who watches over all the travelers, and retraced their steps, and went waterly, and at last they reached the outskirts of the forest, and saw, far down in the valley beneath them, the lights of the village in which they dwelt. So overjoyed were they at their deliverance that they laughed aloud, and the earth seemed to them like a flower of silver, and the moon like a flower of gold. Yet after they had laughed, they became sad, for they remembered their poverty. And one of them said to the other, why did we make merry, seeing that life is for the rich, and not for such as we are? Better that we had died of cold in the forest, or that some wild beast had fallen upon us and slain us. Truly, answered his companion, much is given to some, and little is given to others. Injustice has parcelled out the world, nor is there equal division of aught save of sorrow. But as they were bewailing their misery to each other, this strange thing happened. There fell from heaven a very bright and beautiful star. It slipped down the side of the sky, passing by the other stars in its course, and as they watched it, wondering, It seemed to them to sink behind a clump of willow trees that stood hard by a little sheepfold no more than a stone's throw away. Why, there's a crock of gold for whoever finds it, they cried, and they set to it and ran, so eager were they for the gold. And one of them ran faster than his mate, and outstripped him, and forced his way through the willows, and came out on the other side, and lo, there was indeed a thing of gold lying on the white snow. So he hastened toward it, and stooping down, placed his hands upon it, and it was a cloak of golden tissue, curiously wrought with stars, and wrapped in many folds. And he cried out to his comrade that he had found the treasure that had fallen from the sky. And when his comrade had come up, they sat them down in the snow, and loosened the folds of the cloak, that they might divide the pieces of gold. But alas, no gold was in it, nor silver, nor indeed treasure of any kind, but only a little child who was asleep. Superman. And one of them said to the other, "This is a bitter ending to our hope, nor have we any good fortune. For what doth a child profit to a man? Let us leave it here and go our way, seeing that we are poor men and have children of our own, whose bread we may not give to another." But his companion answered, "Nay, but it were an evil thing to leave the child to perish here in the snow. And though I am as poor as thou art, and have many mouths to feed, and but little in the pot, yet will I bring it home with me, and my wife shall have care of it." So very tenderly he took up the child, and wrapped the cloak around it to shield it from the harsh cold, and made his way down the hill to the village, his comrade marveling much at his foolishness and softness of heart. And when they came to the village, his comrade said to him, "Thou hast the child, therefore give me the cloak, for it is meet that we should share." But he answered him, "Nay, for the cloak is neither mine nor thine, but the child's only." And he bade him Godspeed, and went to his own house and knocked. And when his wife opened the door and saw that her husband had returned safe to her, she put her arms round his neck and kissed him, and took from him back his bundle of sticks, and brushed the snow off his boots, and bade him come in. But he said to her, "I have found something in the forest, and I have brought it to thee to have care of it." And he stirred not from the threshold. "What is it?" she cried. "Show it to me, for the house is bare, and we have need of many things." And he drew the cloak back and showed her the sleeping child. "Alack, good man," she murmured, "have we not children enough of our own, that thou must needs bring a changeling to sit by the hearth? And who knows if it will not bring us bad fortune? And how shall we tend it?" And she was wroth against him. "Nay, but it is a star child," he answered, and he told her a strange manner of finding of it. But she would not be appeased, but mocked at him, and spoke angrily, and cried, "Our children lack bread, and shall we feed the child of another? Who is there who careth for us, and who giveth us food? Nay, but God careth for the sparrows even, and feedeth them," he answered. "Do not the sparrows die of hunger in the winter?" she asked. "And is it not winter now?" And the man answered nothing, but stirred not from the threshold. And a bitter wind from the forest came in through the open door, and made her tremble. And she quivered, and said to him, "Wilt thou not close thy door? There cometh a bitter wind into the house, and I am cold." "Into a house where a heart is hard, cometh there not always a bitter wind?" he asked. And the woman answered him nothing, but crept closer to the fire. And after a time she turned round and looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears. And he came in swiftly, and placed the child in her arms. And she kissed it, and laid it in the little bed where the youngest of their own children was laying. And on the morrow the woodcutter took the curious cloak of gold, and placed it in the great chest, and a chain of amber that was round the child's neck his wife took and set it in the chest also. So the star child was brought up with the children of the woodcutter, and sat at the same board with them, and was their playmate. And every year he became more beautiful to look at, so that all those who dwelt in the village were filled with wonder, for while they were swarthy and black-haired, he was white and delicate as sawn ivory, and his curls were like rings of the daffodil. His lips also were like the petals of red flower, and his eyes were like violets by a river of pure water, his body like the narcissus of field where the mower comes not. Yet did his beauty work from evil, for he grew proud and cruel and selfish. The children of the woodcutter and the other children of the village he despised, saying that they were of mean parentage, while he was noble, being sprung from a star, and made himself master over them, and called them his servants. No pity had he for the poor, for those who were blind or maimed or in any way afflicted, but would cast stones at them and drive them forth on the highway, and bid them beg their bread elsewhere, so that none save outlaws came twice to the village to ask for alms. Indeed, he was as one enamored of beauty, and would mock the weakly and ill-favored, and make jest of them, and himself he loved. And in summer, when the winds were still, he would lie by the well in the priest's orchard, and look down at the marvel of his own face, and laugh for the pleasure he had in his fairness. Often did the woodcutter and his wife chide him and say, "We did not deal with thee, thou dealest with those who are left desolate, and have none to succor them. Wherefore art thou so cruel to all who need pity?" Often did the old priest send for him, and seek to teach him the love of living things, saying to him, "The fly is thy brother, do it no harm. The wild birds that roam through the forest have their freedom, snare them not for thy pleasure. God made the blind worm and the mole, and each has its place. Why art thou to bring pain into God's world? Even the cattle of the field praise him." But the star child heeded not their words, but would frown and flout and go back to his companions and lead them. And his companions followed him, for he was fair and fleet of foot, and could dance and pipe and make music. And wherever the star child led them, they followed. And whatever the star child bade them do, that they did. And when he pierced with a sharp reed the dim eyes of the mole, they laughed. And when he cast stones at the leper, they laughed also. And in all things he ruled them, and they became hard of heart, even as he was. Now there passed one day through the village a poor beggar woman. Her garments were torn and ragged, and her feet were bleeding from the rough road on which she had travelled, and she was in very evil plight. And, being weary, she sat down under the chestnut tree to rest. But when the star child saw her, he said to his companions, "See, there sitteth a foul beggar woman under that fair and green-leaved tree. Come, let us drive her hence, for she is ugly and ill-favoured." So he came near and threw stones at her and mocked her. And she looked at him with terror in her eyes, nor did she move her gaze from him. And when the woodcutter, who was cleaving logs in a haggard hard by, saw what the star child was doing, he ran up and rebuked him, and said to him, "Surely thou art hard of heart, and knowest not mercy. For what evil has this poor woman done to thee, that thou shouldst treat her in this to the wise?" And the star child grew red with anger, and stamped his foot to the ground, and said, "Who art thou to question me of what I do? I am no son of thine, to do thy bidding." "Thou speakest truly," answered Woodcutter. "Yet did I show pity? Did I show thee pity when I found thee in the forest?" And when the woman heard these words, she gave a loud cry and fell into a swoon. and the woodcutter carried her to his own house, and his wife had care of her. And when she rose up from the swoon into which she had fallen, they set meat and drink before her, and bade her to have comfort. But she would neither eat nor drink, but said to the woodcutter, Didst thou not say that the child was found in the forest? And was it not 10 years from this day? And the woodcutter answered, Yea, it was in the forest that I found him, and it was 10 years from this day. And what signs didst thou find with him? She cried. Bore he not upon his neck a chain of amber? Was not around him a cloak of gold tissue broidered with stars? Truly, answered the woodcutter, it was even as thou sayest. And he took the cloak and amber chain from the chest where they lay, and showed them to her. And when she saw them, she wept for joy, and said, He is my little son, whom I lost in the forest. I pray thee, send for him quickly, for in search of him have I wandered over the whole world. So the woodcutter and his wife went out and called to the star child, and said to him, Go into the house, and there shalt thou find thy mother, who is waiting for thee. So he ran in, filled with wonder and great gladness. But when he saw her who was waiting there, he laughed scornfully and said, "Oh, why, where is my mother? For I see none here but this vile beggar woman." And the woman answered him, I am thy mother. Thou art mad to say so, cried the star child angrily. I am no son of thine, for thou art a beggar and ugly and in rags. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thy foul face no more. Nay, but thou art indeed my little son, whom I bore in the forest, she cried, and she fell on her knees and held out her arms to him. The robbers stole thee from me, and left thee to die, she murmured. But I recognized thee when I saw thee, and the signs also have I recognized, the cloak of golden tissue and the amber chain. Therefore I pray thee, come with me, for over the whole world have I wandered in search of thee. Come with me, my son, for I have need of thy love. But the star child stirred not from his place, but shut the doors of his heart against her. Nor was there any sound heard, save the sound of the woman weeping for pain. And at last he spoke to her, and his voice was hard and bitter. If in thy very truth thou art my mother, he said, it had been better hadst thou stayed away, and not come here to bring me to shame, seeing that I thought I was a child of some star, and not a beggar's child, as thou tellest me that I am. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thee no more. Alas, my son, she cried, wilt thou not kiss me before I go? For I have suffered much to find thee. Nay, said the star child, but thou art too foul to look at, and rather would I kiss the adder or a toad than thee. So the woman rose up and went away into the forest, weeping bitterly. And when the star child saw that she had gone, he was glad, and ran back to his playmates that he might play with them. But when they beheld him coming, they mocked him and said, Why art thou as foul as the toad, and as loathsome as the adder? Get thee hence, for we will not suffer thee to play with us. And they drave him out of the garden. And the star child frowned and said to himself, What is this that they say to me? I will go to the well of water and look into it, and it shall tell me of my beauty. So he went to the well of the water and looked into it, and lo, his face was the face of a toad, and the body was scaled like an adder. And he flung himself down on the grass and wept, and said to himself, Surely this has come upon me by the reason of my sin, for I have denied my mother and driven her away, and been proud and cruel to her. Wherefore I will go and seek her through the whole world, nor will I rest till I have found her. And there came to him the little daughter of the woodcutter, and she put her hand upon his shoulder and said, What does it matter if thou hast lost thy comeliness? Stay with us, and I will not mock at thee. And he said to her, Nay, but I have been cruel to my mother, and as a punishment has this evil been sent to me. Wherefore I must go hence and wander through the world till I find her, and she give me her forgiveness. So he ran away into the forest and called out to his mother to come to him, but there was no answer. All day long he called to her, and when the sun set, he lay down to sleep on a bed of leaves, and the birds and the animals fled from him, for they remembered his cruelty. And he was alone, save for the toad that watched him, and the slow adder that crawled past. And in the morning he rose up, and plucked some bitter berries from the trees, and ate them, and took his way through the great wood, weeping sorely. And of everything that he met, he made inquiry if perchance they had seen his mother. He said to the mole, "Thou canst go beneath the earth. Tell me, is my mother there?" The mole answered, "Thou hast blinded mine eyes. How should I know?" He said to the linnet, Thou canst fly over the tops of the trees, and canst see the whole world. Tell me, canst thou see my mother?" And the linnet answered, "Thou hast clipped my wings for thy pleasure. How should I fly?" And a little squirrel who lived in the fir tree and was lonely, he said, "Where is my mother?" And the squirrel answered, "Thou hast slain mine. Dost thou seek to slay thine also?" And the star child wept and bowed his head and prayed forgiveness of God's things, and went on through the forest, seeking for the beggar woman. And on the third day he came to the other side of the forest, and went down into the plain. And when he passed through the villages, the children mocked him, and threw stones at him, and the charlottes would not suffer him to sleep in the briars, lest he might bring mildew on the stored corn. So foul was he to look at, and their hired men drave him away, and there was none who had pity on him, nor could he hear anywhere of the beggar woman, who was his mother. Though for the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and often seemed to see her on the road in front of him, and would call to her and run after her till the sharp flints made his feet bleed. But overtake her he could not. And those who dwelt by the way did ever deny that they had seen her, or any like to her, and they made sport of his sorrow. For the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and in the world there was neither love, nor loving kindness, nor charity for him, but it was even such a world as he had made for himself, even the days of his great pride. And one evening he came to the gate of the strong walled city that stood by the river, and the weary and footsore though he was, he made no he made to enter in. But the soldiers who stood on guard dropped their halberts across the entrance and said roughly to him, "What is thy business in this city?" "I am seeking my mother," he answered, "and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, for it may be that she is in this city." But they mocked him, and one of them wagged a black beard and set down his shield and cried, "O, a truth, thy mother will not be merry when she sees thee, for thou art more ill-favoured than the toad of the marsh, or the adder that crawls in the fen. Get thee gone, thy mother dwells not in this city." And another, who held a yellow banner in his hand, said to him, "Why is thy mother? Who is thy mother, and wherefore art thou seeking for her?" And he answered, "My mother is a beggar, even as I am, and I have treated her evilly, and I pray ye to suffer me to pass, that she may give me her forgiveness, if it be that she tarrieth in the city." But they would not, and pricked him with their spears. And as he turned away weeping, one whose armor was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet crouched a lion that had wings, came up and made inquiry of the soldiers who it was who had sought entrance. And they said to him, "It is a beggar, and the child of a beggar, and we have driven him away." "Nay," he cried, laughing, "but we will sell the foul thing for a slave, and his price shall be the price of a bowl of sweet wine." And an old and evil-visaged man who was passing by called out and said, "I will buy him for that price." And when he had paid the price, he took the star child by the hand and led him into the city. And after that they had gone through the many streets, they came to a little door that was set in the wall that was covered with pomegranate tree. And the old man touched the door with a ring of graved jasper, and it opened, and they went down 5 steps of brass into a garden filled with black poppies and jars of burnt clay. And the old man took from took then from his turban a scarf of figured silk, and bound with it the eyes of the star child, and drave him in front of him. And when the scarf was taken off his eyes, the star child found himself in a dungeon that was lit by a lantern of horn. And the old man set before him some mouldy bread on a trencher, and said, "Eat," and some brackish water in a cup, and said, "Drink." And when he had eaten and drunk, the old man went out, locking the door behind him, and fastening it with an iron chain. And on the morrow, the old man, who was indeed the subtlest of the magicians of Libya, and had learned his art from one who dwelt in the tombs of the Nile, came into him and frowned at him, and said, "In a wood that is nigh to the gate of the city of Grigors, there are 3 pieces of gold. One is of white gold, and another is of yellow gold, and the gold of the third is red. Today thou shalt bring me a piece of the white gold, and if thou bringest it not back, I will beat thee with 100 stripes. Get thee away quickly, and at sunset I will be waiting for thee at the door of the garden. See that thou bringest the white gold, or it shall go ill with thee. For thou art my slave, and I have bought thee for the price of a bowl of sweet wine." And he bound the eyes of the star child with a scarf of figured silk, and led him through the house, and through the garden of poppies, and up the 5 steps of brass, and having opened the little door with his ring, he set him in the street. And the star child went out of the gate of the city, and came to the wood of which the magician had spoken to him. Now this wood was very fair to look at from without, and seemed full of singing birds, and of sweet scented flowers. And the star child entered it gladly. Yet did its beauty profit him little, for wherever he went, harsh briars and thorns shot up from the ground and encompassed him, and evil nettles stung him, and the thistle pierced him with her daggers, so that he was not in sore distress, nor could he anywhere find the piece of white gold of which the magician had spoken, though he sought for it from morn to noon, and from noon to sunset. And at sunset he set his face towards home, weeping bitterly, for he knew what fate was in store for him. And when he reached the outskirts of the wood, he heard from the thicket a cry of someone in pain. And forgetting his own sorrow, he ran back to the place, and saw there a little hare caught in a trap that some hunter had set for it. And the star child had pity on it, and released it, and said, "I am myself but a slave, yet may I give thee thy freedom." And the hare answered him and said, "Surely thou hast given me freedom, and what shall I give thee in return?" And the star child said to it, "I am seeking for a piece of white gold, nor can I anywhere find it, and if I bring it not to my master, he will beat me." "Come thou with me," said the hare, "and I will lead thee to it, for I know where it is hidden, and for what purpose." So the star child went with the hare, and lo, in the cleft of the great oak tree, he saw the piece of white gold that he was seeking, and he was filled with joy, and seized it, and said to the hare, "The service that I did to thee, thou hast rendered back again many times over, and the kindness that I showed thee, thou hast repaid 100-fold." "Nay," answered the hare, "but thou dealt with me, so I did deal with thee." And it ran away quickly. And the star child went towards the city. Now at the gate of the city there was seated one who was a leper. Over his face hung a cowl of grey linen, and through the eyelets of his eyes gleamed like red coals. And when he saw the star child coming, he struck upon a wooden bowl, and clattered his bell, and called out to him, and said, "Give me a piece of money, or I must die of hunger. For they have thrust me out of the city, and there is no one who has pity on me." Alas, cried the Star Child, I have but one piece of money in my wallet, and if I bring it not to my master, he will beat me, for I am his slave. But the leper entreated him and prayed of him till the Star Child had pity and gave him one piece of white gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him and brought him in and said to him, Hast thou the piece of white gold? And the Star Child answered, I have it not. So the magician fell upon him and beat him, and set before him an empty trencher, and said, Eat, an empty cup, and said, Drink, and flung him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him again and said, If today thou bringest me not the piece of yellow gold, I will surely keep thee as my slave, and give thee 300 stripes. So the Star Child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for a piece of yellow gold, but nowhere could he find it. And at sunset he sat him down and began to weep. And as he was weeping, there came to him a little hare that had rescued from the trap. And the hare said to him, Why art thou weeping? And what dost thou seek in the wood? And the Star Child answered, I am seeking for a piece of yellow gold that is hidden here, and if I find it not, my master will beat me and keep me as a slave. Follow me, cried the hare, and it ran to the wood till it came to a pool of water. And at the bottom of the pool the piece of yellow gold was lying. How shall I thank thee, said the Star Child, for lo, this is the second time you have succored me. Nay, but thou hadst pity on me first, said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. And the Star Child took the piece of yellow gold and put it in his wallet and hurried to the city. But the leper saw him coming and ran to meet him and knelt down and cried, Give me a piece of money, or I shall die of hunger. And the Star Child said to him, I have in my wallet but one piece of yellow gold, and if I bring it not to my master, he will beat me and keep me as his slave. But the leper entreated him sore, so that the Star Child had pity on him, and gave him the piece of yellow gold. And when he came to the magician's house, the magician opened to him and brought him in, and said to him, Hast thou the piece of yellow gold? And the Star Child said to him, I have it not. So the magician fell upon him, and beat him, and loaded him with chains, and cast him again into the dungeon. And on the morrow the magician came to him and said, If today thou bringest me not a piece of red gold, I will set thee free. But if thou bringest it not, I will surely slay thee. So the Star Child went to the wood, and all day long he searched for the piece of red gold, but nowhere could he find it. And at evening he set him down and wept, and he was weeping. There came to him the little hare, and the hare said to him, The piece of red gold that thou seekest is in the cavern that is behind thee. Therefore weep no more, but be glad. How shall I reward thee? Cried the Star Child, for lo, this is the third time thou hast secured me. Nay, but thou hadst pity on me first, said the hare, and it ran away swiftly. And the Star Child entered the cavern, and in its farthest corner he found the piece of red gold. So he put it in his wallet and hurried to the city. And the leper, seeing him coming, stood in the center of the road and cried out and said to him, Give me the piece of red money, or I must die. And the Star Child had pity on him again, and gave him the piece of red gold, saying, Thy need is greater than mine. Yet was his heart heavy, for he knew what evil fate awaited him. But lo, as he passed through the gate of the city, the guards bowed down and made obeisance to him, saying, How beautiful is our Lord! And a crowd of citizens followed him, and cried out, Surely there is none so beautiful in the whole world, so that the Star Child wept and said to himself, They are mocking me and making light of my misery. And so large was the concourse of the people that he lost his threads of his way, and found himself at last in the great square, in which there was a palace of the king. And the gate of the palace opened, and the priests and the high officers of the city ran forth to meet him, and they abased themselves before him, and said, Thou art our Lord, for whom we have been waiting, and the son of our king. And the Star Child answered them and said, I am no king's son, but the child of a poor beggar woman. And thou art And how say ye that I am beautiful? For I know that I am evil to look at. Then he whose armor was inlaid with gilt flowers, and on whose helmet crouched a lion that had wings, held up a shield and cried, How saith my lord that he is not beautiful? And the star child looked, and lo, his face was even as it had been, and his comeliness had come back to him. And he saw that in his eyes, which he had not seen there before, the priests and the high officers knelt down and said to him, It was prophesied of old that on this day should come he who is to rule over us. Therefore, let our Lord take his crown and his scepter, and be in his justice and mercy our king over us. But he said to them, I am not worthy, for I have denied my mother who bare me, nor may I rest till I have found her, and known her forgiveness. Therefore let me go, for I must wander again over the world, and may not tarry here, though ye bring me a crown and the scepter. And as he spake, he turned his face from them towards the street that led to the gate of the city, and lo, amongst the crowd that pressed round the soldiers, he saw the beggar woman, who was his mother, and at her side stood the leper who had sat by the road. And a cry of joy broke from his lips, and he ran over, and kneeling down, he kissed the wounds on his mother's feet, and wet them with his tears. He bowed his head in the dust, and sobbing as one whose heart might break, he said to her, Mother, I denied thee in my hour of my pride. Accept me in my hour of my humility. Mother, I gave thee hatred. Do thou give me love. Mother, I rejected thee. Receive thy child now. But the beggar woman answered him not a word. And he reached out his hand and clasped the white feet of the leper, and said to him, Thrice did I give thee of my mercy. Bid my mother speak to me once. But the leper answered him not a word. And he sobbed again and said, Mother, my suffering is great, greater than I can bear. Excuse me. Give me thy forgiveness, and let me go back to the forest. And the beggar woman put her hand on his head and said to him, Rise. And the leper put his hand on his head and said to him, Rise also. And he rose up from his feet and looked at them, and lo, they were king and queen. And the queen said to him, This is thy father whom thou hast succored. And the king said, This is thy mother whose feet thou hast washed with thy tears. And they fell on his neck and kissed him, and brought him into the palace, and clothed him in fair raiment, and set the crown upon his head, and the scepter in his hand. And over the city that stood by the river he ruled, and was its lord. Much justice and mercy did he show to all. And the evil magician he banished, and the woodcutter and his wife he sent many rich gifts, and to their children he gave high honor. Nor would he suffer any to be cruel to a bird or beast, but taught love and loving kindness and charity. And to the poor he gave bread, and to the naked he gave raiment. And there was peace and plenty in the land. He ruled, yet he ruled not long. So great had been his suffering, and so bitter the fire of his testing. For after the space of 3 years he died, and he who came after him ruled evilly. Well, that was a happy ending. I liked that one wasn't so Jesus-y. I liked that one a little bit more. Um, hmm. Wow. Okay, I don't know what to say of that one. Let's see what we have here. Let's see. Good evening, Lauren. Good to see you. Thank you, sweet Ciara. Thank you, Ali. Yes, we all are tortured. Roses and Rue said it's sad Oscar had to suffer so in here for our time. He would have been still an amazing man, maybe not so religious, hopefully, and would have lived freely. I love Oscar Wilde, and his work. His work is beautiful. It is beautiful. Mary Jane says, so sorry, Richard Lale. I tried to say something similar about Wilde, but it would not take. Too many words. Thank you. You're very welcome. Also, thank you, by the way. Heather, I just got here. What are you reading? Lauren Morgan Richards, The House of Pomegranates. Matt Avila says, I love your voice. Have you ever done an ebook? I did an ebook. Actually, you can find Lauren Morgan Richards. I did his book, The Goodbye Family. It is available. I think, Lauren, if you're still here, oh, it is on Audible. There it is. Lauren actually did write that. Get the hints. I love that line. I'm going to use it. Shrouded Grove. I think I shall use that too. Matt says, like, I would love for you to read Dune. That would be interesting. Sweet Sierra said, I had never heard The Star Child before. That was beautiful. It was beautiful. You know, I will tell you, Oscar Wilde in this point was delivering a little bit about himself because Bowley, was that his name? His lover was of minor nobility, and he was blonde and he was good looking and he was several years younger than Oscar, but he was Bosie. Bosie was his name, but he was cruel. Bosie was cruel. He was a cruel lover, and Oscar fantasized about wealth, but then also felt strangely about attaining wealth. Um, it's funny because even though he was, you know, he was a homosexual and he was he was sent to trial and he lost everything. It really indicates really he was trying so desperately to be good. He was trying to be good. Um, would he have been religious today? I don't know. Who's to say? I mean, Pete Buttigieg is I don't know him personally, but he seems like a good, intelligent, clever fellow, and he is openly gay and a Christian, so it can happen. Yes, Bosie. Um, it can happen, but who knows? I mean, for me, I cannot adhere to principles of Christianity, knowing that the book was used to it was used to divide men and women and ethnic groups and creeds and wealth class. I cannot adhere to an oppressive book like that, but I understand Oscar Wilde. Anyway, with that, my beauties, it is late. I know I ran over that last story. It was a little long. I ran half an hour. With that, I will let you go. Um, Thank you, Ali. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who stayed with me. It was such an honor. I appreciate each and every one of you. Find me at thegentlemanpsychic.com. Also, you can find me on Patreon / The Gentleman's House. On Instagram, I am Richard Lael Lillard, and you have to look at spelling. It's Richard is easy, and then Lael, and then Lillard. There's no extra I's, there's no extra L's. There are 18 letters. That is it. I have two of those. There is the Parlor of the Gentleman Psychic and the Gentleman Psychic Richard Lael Lillard. I have that. And then on Facebook, I actually have two accounts too. There's Richard space Lael Lillard, and then there is Richard Lael Lillard. And that one is only so whenever I get in Facebook jail, I get to still scroll through and look at Marketplace because that's how I amuse myself. With that, my lovelies, thank you for staying with me. I appreciate you. If I don't see you, happy holidays, happy Christmas, happy Kwanzaa, happy season to you. I appreciate each and every one of you. You are most welcome. I will see you next time. Oh, one more announcement. This next week I may not be here. I'm going to try. I have a Q&A through the University Magicus where we'll be talking about my time on Ghost Adventures. It's going to be at 9 o'clock Eastern. So I'm going to try to make it. I may run late. I may not be able to make it, but I don't know yet. So I'm going to try. If I am here, I'm here. And if I'm not, well, University Magicus, and you can find me there. Anyway, happy holidays to each and every one of you. Happy Hanukkah, happy Kwanzaa, happy, Merry, Merry, love. Anyway, love to you. I will see you another time. Good night.